On April 16, 2020, CD Projekt RED is releasing their highly anticipated game Cyberpunk 2077. I've been closely following this game since the original trailer came out in 2013. This was 4 years before I became an actual cyborg, and during that time I was playing The Witcher 2 on Xbox 360. That port was the first CD Projekt RED game I had ever played, and while it had its rough edges, the writing and world building were spectacular. I was immediately drawn into the dense politics of this fantasy world. It made me think that this team could end up doing some amazing things in a dystopian cyberpunk world. CDPR was working on another game at the time of that Cyberpunk announcement though, and if Witcher 2 made me hopeful that Cyberpunk would most likely be a good game, the game that made me certain they are capable of making a masterpiece was The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt. I first played Witcher 3 on PlayStation 4 in the days before I made the jump to PC, or jump back, should I say. In the late 90s I was all about QUAKE II. I definitely liked it at the time, with the famous Bloody Baron quest being a notable standout, but it just didn't get its hooks into me the way that it eventually would. The combat felt sluggish due to the frame rate, which struggled to hold 30 FPS. It wasn't unplayable, but I understand why many console players are under the impression that Witcher 3 has quote-unquote bad combat. The other problem I had with the game on my first time around was not properly understanding the way the game was paced. I approached Witcher 3 as I did many other action RPGs. I would try to grind early on to make my character competent enough for the trials ahead. The problem is, Witcher 3 is designed so that you can't grind by getting into random altercations and fighting random monsters. You only gain experience in any tangible way by completing quests. Long story short, I played it until about Novigrad, went to the Masquerade Ball with Triss, then moved on to other games and never really went back. On PS4, that is. In 2018, a 45-minute gameplay demo of Cyberpunk released, and it rekindled my fascination with CD Projekt. All signs pointed to them not only being an extremely competent developer, but also a very consumer-focused company overall. Their good old game storefront offers games with no system of digital rights management, meaning no online overlord to handshake with in order to verify that the games you bought are games you own. You just own the games you bought. Simple as that. Crazy, isn't it? The downloadable content they released for Witcher 3 was also spectacularly pro-consumer, with a dozen free DLCs coming out over the course of the game's life. 2 large paid expansions were also released, which were well worth the price of admission. Blood and Wine in particular added more content to Witcher 3 than most full games have. So when I saw Witcher 3 Complete Edition on a Steam sale, I figured I'd give it another shot. And man, what a difference a few years of technology can make to improve a game experience. It became almost immediately clear to me that like Witcher 2 on 360, Witcher 3 was being stripped down to its bare essentials to run on PS4 or Xbox One. So forgive me if I'm not expecting too much from Witcher 3. On a PC which can handle 60 frames a second at ultra settings, Witcher 3 is one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen, with the possible exception of ALEXANDRA DADDARIO in the first season of True Detective. Oh boy. Aesthetics aren't the only aspect of the game that benefit from more competent hardware, as the frame rate turns the clunky combat I was experiencing on the PS4 into a smooth cinematic ballet, which combines a bit of the multi-target melee of the Arkham games with some strategic use of spell casting, and gory kill animations would put the Fallout VATS kills to shame. This is achieved largely by virtue of the controls feeling far more responsive at 60 frames a second than they did at 30, with the added bonus of that frame rate not dipping below 60 the way it dropped below 30 on the PS4. The end result is fewer moments where you swear the game was on autopilot and decided it was time for you to die, and more moments when you feel like a badass Witcher. Combat is only half the battle, or half the equation. Carry the one? Irrelevant. What I mean is that there's a lot more to love about Witcher 3 than how cool it is to hack up enemy bandits and monsters. The writing in this game is hard to describe. Everything from the main story quests to the random errands from townsfolk which have you carrying out a task have an abundance of effort and noticeable care in the way they're scripted. This is where the genius of the experience progression can be discovered. The progression system may seem sluggish at first, making it seem like you have to accomplish 3 or 4 errands, 2 or 3 contracts or side quests, or even more than one main quest to advance even a single level sometimes. That can seem discouraging to people who are having difficulty getting into the game, and were it a game which allowed you to buy experience boosters for real money, the argument could be made that the progression speed is predatory. But you can't. There's no amount of extra money that you can give to CD Projekt RED to accelerate the game, because they aren't trying to force you to spend money. They're trying to force you to engage with their writing. When you stop fighting the tide and just let that happen, you'll find that you're rewarded not just with an abundance of experience points and level ups, but also with actual experiences. The stories you get to experience by traversing the countryside and partaking in the activities Witcher 3 offers, even outside of the main quests, are so worthwhile that when looked at cumulatively, it's difficult to not have Witcher 3 mentioned in conversations about the quote-unquote best games ever made. Part of this is because it's almost the norm these days that open-world games are jam-packed with side content which feels like work. It's normal to want to engage with open-world side content for the sole purpose of increasing your character's power, or to allow access to the game's main content. It is normal for side content to feel like roadblocks, more than pieces of storytelling worth engaging in. As time goes on, both the gaming and film industries have been focusing on recycling franchises, rebooting old properties, and marketing nostalgia. Witcher 3 is based on a series of novels, which in turn were based on Polish folklore, but the writers of Witcher 3 don't bank on reminding you of old things to pull you in. Their focus is where a writer's focus should be, on telling compelling stories. In this case, dozens, if not hundreds, of small stories weaving in and out of a very well-written main quest. The main quest does involve a looming existential threat in the form of an icy apocalypse, but unlike a certain HBO fantasy series, it ends in a satisfying way which feels earned by the narrative that comes before it, not simply rushed to a malformed conclusion. I'll admit that this comparison to Game of Thrones was a bit of a tangent, but I'm still a bit sore about Season 8's quality, and playing Witcher 3, along with reading Kentaro Miura's BERSERK, helped me soothe the pain and breathe a sigh of relief knowing that there is good dark fantasy content out there. I'm still rooting for Georgie Boy to stick the landing on those books, and maybe to help Miyazaki-san deliver another game I'll want to get a tattoo of when Elden Ring launches, though I still gotta find a way to add Sekiro to my Dark Souls Bloodborne tattoo.
Nerd alert!
So getting down to brass tacks, the real question is, should you play a game which launched over 4 years ago and will probably take you between 80 and 100 hours to finish, or at this point should you just skip it? While I pride my recommend series on attempting to explain both why you will or why you may not end up wanting to invest time in a game, this is absolutely a game that everyone should play. There are two downsides to this game. First, the game starts slowly, although by the time you get to Skellige, you'll have a better understanding of why the pacing is the way it is. The slow start helps gradually introduce you to the systems, figure out the gameplay loop, understand how the progression system works, and learn enough about the world's politics and social structures so that the latter half of the game has higher stakes and makes more sense. More importantly, you'll be invested in the characters, with all the primary and secondary characters revealing themselves to be far deeper than they appear when you first meet them. The other large downside is that if you're playing on a console, the game does not run super well. It's definitely playable, and I've spoken to many console-only players who love this game as much as I do, but you're much more likely to think that the game feels clunky and rough, particularly when it comes to traversal and combat, than if you play on even a low to mid-range PC and just dial the settings in so that you can hold a steady 60 frames a second. The other option is to hope that the next generation of consoles, likely to release in 2020, will be able to run the current versions better, or that a remaster will be released. The problem from the perspective of this video is that those consoles will launch after Cyberpunk 2077 does, so it doesn't really help my thesis, which is Witcher 3 is a game that you should play before Cyberpunk comes out. Those gripes pale in comparison to all of the things Witcher 3 does incredibly well. I'd have to entirely change formats to go into an in-depth critique, as unlike Plague Tale, Project Warlock, or Curse of the Moon, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is packed to the brim with content, and hours-long videos could be made about nearly any aspect of it. The art direction, music, performances, gameplay loop, content value, and most of all the writing are all top quality, and if you're looking for a game which can get you ready for Cyberpunk 2077, a dark fantasy story that'll help you get over Game of Thrones, or an engrossing open world which you can get lost in for months on end, MarcTheCyborg recommends you look no further than The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. P.S. The Word of Wolf has a fantastic primer video which explains the Witcher novels and the first two games. It's not hard to jump into The Witcher 3 cold, but knowing the backstory will help you appreciate how much the writers at CD Projekt RED cared about and respected the lore of the source material. He's an edgy boy, so his content isn't for the easily offended, but he has a good eye for writing quality, so if you're interested in a YouTuber who is a tad spicier than this milquetoast Canadian cyborg, check out The Word of Wolf, link in the description.